The rain hammered against the windshield of Jake Morrison's rental Peugeot as he navigated the narrow cobblestone streets of Bayeux. October in Normandy felt like the world was drowning in grey. Grey skies, grey stone buildings, grey memories seeping from every war memorial he'd passed on his way from Charles de Gaulle Airport. The GPS announced his destination in mechanical French, and Jake squinted through the storm to make out the weathered sign, Hôtel des Remparts. At 34, Jake had built his reputation as an investigative journalist by finding stories others missed, digging where others feared to tread. His exposé on corporate corruption in Chicago's water department had earned him a Polk Award and enough credibility to freelance for major publications. But this assignment felt different, personal almost. The hotel's proprietress, a silver-haired woman in her 70s, emerged from behind an antique reception desk as Jake shook rain from his jacket. "Monsieur Morrison?" Her English carried the melodic accent of educated French. "I am Amélie Beaumont. We spoke on the phone." Jake extended his hand, noting the firmness of her grip and the way her dark eyes seemed to assess him. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview, Madame Beaumont. I know the timing is difficult." Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Grandpère died only 2 weeks ago. Perhaps it is too soon to—" "I understand your hesitation," Jake interrupted gently. "But sometimes the stories that matter most are the ones we tell when the pain is still fresh, when the truth still burns." Amélie studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward a sitting area near an enormous stone fireplace. "Coffee? You look as though you've been traveling for days." "Just 18 hours, but who's counting?" Jake attempted a smile as he settled into a chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent in Chicago. The hotel wasn't just old, it was historic old. The kind of place where you expected to find secret passages and hidden rooms. Amélie returned with a silver tray bearing coffee that smelled like heaven and pastries that looked like art. "You said on the phone that you are writing about D-Day veterans. But my grandfather, Henri Beaumont, he was not a soldier." Jake pulled out his digital recorder, setting it carefully on the carved wooden table between them. "Not officially, no. But according to my research, he was 17 when the Allies landed. Old enough to remember everything that happened in this town during the occupation. Many people remember." Amélie's voice carried a warning. "Not all memories should become newspaper stories." "I'm not looking for sensational headlines," Jake assured her. "I'm trying to understand how ordinary people survived extraordinary circumstances, how they made impossible choices." Amélie's laugh was bitter. "Ordinary? Monsieur Morrison, there was nothing ordinary about what happened here." She stood abruptly, walking to a window that overlooked the hotel's courtyard. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the view of ancient stones and modern tourism. "Do you know what it was like, having German officers taking breakfast in your dining room while Allied bombers flew overhead at night? Serving coffee to men who could order your execution for any reason or no reason at all?" Jake kept his voice neutral, journalistic. "Your grandfather ran this hotel during the war." "This hotel, yes. But also—" She turned back to him, and Jake saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, regret. "There are things about Grandpère that I never understood until I found his papers. Things that make me question everything I thought I knew about my family." There it is, Jake thought. The crack in the facade. What kind of things? Instead of answering, Amélie walked to an antique writing desk and withdrew a manila envelope. She sat back down, clutching it in her lap like a shield. "After the funeral, I was cleaning out Grandpère's room, the one he kept locked for as long as I can remember. I found this." She slid a black-and-white photograph across the table. Jake picked it up, his trained eye immediately noting the quality and composition. The photo showed a younger Henri Beaumont, perhaps 19 or 20, standing between two men in military uniforms. On his left, an American GI with lieutenant's bars. On his right, a German officer in the distinctive uniform of the Wehrmacht. All three men were smiling. "When was this taken?" Jake asked, though he already suspected the answer would complicate everything. June 1944, according to the notation on the back, 2 days after D-Day. Jake turned the photograph over. In fading ink, someone had written, HB, final meeting before Phase 2. All parties in agreement. June 8th, 1944. Jesus, Jake whispered. He was working with both sides? That's what I thought at first. Amélie's voice was barely audible above the rain. But there's more. She opened the envelope and spread its contents on the table. More photographs, documents in German and English, what appeared to be coded messages, and a leather-bound journal with Henri's name embossed in gold. I've been going through these for 2 weeks, using Google Translate to understand the German documents. What I've learned. She shook her head. It's impossible. Jake leaned forward, his journalist instincts now fully engaged. What did you learn? My grandfather wasn't just collaborating with the Germans or helping the Americans. According to these documents, he was feeding intelligence to the French resistance, the American OSS, and the German Abwehr simultaneously. A triple agent. Jake felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just a human interest story about wartime survival. This was potentially one of the most significant intelligence revelations of the past decade. Amélie nodded, tears forming in her eyes. But how is that possible? How does someone play 3 sides against each other without getting caught, and why? She gestured at the hotel around them. We weren't political people. We were just trying to keep our business alive. Jake studied the documents spread before him. Even with his limited French and non-existent German, he could see this was bigger than a simple survival story. The letterheads, the official seals, the complex coded notations, this represented a level of coordination that would have required resources, contacts, and skills far beyond what a teenage hotel proprietor should have possessed. Amélie, he said carefully, where did your grandfather keep all of this? I mean, hiding something like this for 8 decades. She was quiet for so long that Jake wondered if she'd heard him. Finally, she spoke. The attic. The hotel attic? Not just the attic. A sealed room in the attic. Grandpère told me it was damaged during the bombardment in 1944 and wasn't safe to enter. He had it walled off. She met Jake's eyes. I always believed him. Why would I doubt? Jake's mind was racing. But you've been inside now? No. Amélie's admission came out in a rush. I found these papers in his bedroom, but I haven't been up there. I'm afraid of what else I might find. What do you mean? She pulled out one more item from the envelope, a brass key attached to a piece of paper with Henri's handwriting. Pour Amélie, quand je ne serai plus là, la vérité t'attend dans le grenier. Sois courageuse. Jake's high school French was rusty, but he caught the essential meaning. For Amélie, when I'm no longer here, the truth awaits you in the attic. Be brave. He wanted you to find this, Jake realized. He left you a roadmap. Amélie nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. But I can't go up there alone. Whatever secrets Grandpère kept for 79 years, they must be terrible if he never told anyone. Jake felt the familiar thrill that came with standing at the edge of a major story. But looking at Amélie's frightened expression, he also felt something else, a responsibility to help this woman understand her family's hidden history, regardless of where that truth might lead. I'll go with you, he offered, if you want. She looked at him with surprise and gratitude. You would do that, even though you barely know me. I'm a journalist, Amélie. Finding the truth is what I do. Jake gestured toward the documents. Besides, this isn't just your family's story anymore. If your grandfather really was operating at the level these documents suggest, it could change how historians understand the intelligence war in occupied France. Amélie was quiet for several minutes, staring into the fire. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault on the medieval stones of Bayeux. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady with resolve. All right, we'll do it together. She stood and walked toward a narrow staircase at the far end of the lobby. But we do this properly. I have flashlights, tools to remove the wall boarding. If we're going to disturb Grandpère's secrets, we owe it to his memory to be thorough." As they climbed the stairs, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing some invisible threshold. The hotel seemed to grow colder with each step, and the sound of their footsteps echoed strangely in the narrow stairwell. The second floor contained guest rooms, most empty in the off-season. The third floor housed family quarters and storage, but the fourth floor, accessible only by a ladder through a trapdoor in the ceiling, was where Henri Beaumont had hidden his life's most dangerous secrets. Amélie pulled down the ladder with practiced movements, suggesting she'd been up here before, though probably not recently. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight as they climbed into the attic space. The room was larger than Jake had expected, with exposed beams creating dramatic shadows in their lights. Most of the space was filled with typical attic detritus, old furniture, trunks, Christmas decorations. But at the far end, Jake could see what Amélie meant about the sealed room. A wall of newer boards, clearly installed decades after the original construction, blocked off perhaps a third of the attic. The wood had aged to match the surrounding beams, but the construction technique was unmistakably different. "There," Amélie whispered, as if speaking too loudly might wake something better, left sleeping. They approached the false wall, and Jake immediately noticed several things that suggested this wasn't just bomb damage repair. The boarding was too systematic, too carefully constructed, and near the bottom, almost hidden by shadows, was a small brass lock mechanism. He built a door, Jake realized. This isn't just a sealed room, it's a secret room. Amélie fumbled with the brass key her grandfather had left her. Her hands were shaking, and Jake gently took the key from her. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. "Once we open this door, there's no going back to not knowing." She nodded firmly. "Grandpère left this for me. Whatever's in there, he wanted me to find it." Jake inserted the key. It turned smoothly, as if the mechanism had been maintained despite decades of disuse. He pushed gently, and a section of the wall swung inward on silent hinges. The smell hit them first, not musty or damp as Jake had expected, but clean and dry, with a hint of oil and leather. Their flashlight beams revealed a space that looked frozen in time, 1944 to be exact. The room was perhaps 12 feet square and had been meticulously organized. Along one wall, military uniforms hung on wooden hangers, German Wehrmacht, American Army, and French resistance armbands. Radio equipment occupied a desk that looked like it belonged in a spy movie, complete with codebooks and transmission schedules. Maps covered another wall, marked with symbols and notations in 3 different languages. But it was the photographs that made Jake's blood run cold. Hundreds of them pinned to boards like a detective's case wall. Not just military personnel, but civilians, documents, buildings, and what appeared to be surveillance photos taken with telephoto lenses. And in the center of it all, a large portrait of Adolf Hitler with a red X marked across his face. "Mon Dieu," Amélie breathed. Jake moved deeper into the room, his flashlight beam revealing more details. Filing cabinets labeled with dates from 1940 to 1945. A typewriter with ribbons in different colors. And on the desk, as if Henry had just stepped out for coffee, an open ledger book with entries dated just days before his death. "Amélie," Jake said slowly, "I don't think your grandfather was just a triple agent." She joined him at the desk, looking over his shoulder as he read the final entries. Even with the mixture of French and code words, the meaning was clear. Henri Beaumont had been actively monitoring and reporting on people in Bayeux until the day he died. "But who was he reporting to?" Amélie whispered. Jake's flashlight beam swept across the room one more time, and that's when he saw it. A modern laptop computer plugged into the wall and displaying a screensaver. Next to it, a printer with paper still in the tray, and a stack of photographs that were clearly taken within the past year. Henri Beaumont hadn't just been preserving history. He'd been continuing his work as an intelligence operative well into the 21st century. And based on the dates Jake could see on some of the recent documents, he'd been active until just weeks before his death. "Jesus Christ," Jake muttered, then looked at Amelie. "I think your grandfather was still working for someone. The question is, who?" As if in answer to his question, Jake's flashlight beam illuminated a corkboard near the laptop. Pinned to it were recent photographs of people Jake didn't recognize, along with newspaper clippings from various European publications. But at the center of the board was something that made his journalist's instincts scream with excitement and terror in equal measure. A photograph of Amelie herself, taken just days ago outside the hotel, with a single word written across it in red ink: compromised. The silence in the sealed room was broken by the sound of the hotel's front door slamming shut somewhere far below them. Then footsteps on the stairs, multiple sets of footsteps, moving with military precision toward the upper floors. Amelie grabbed Jake's arm. "No one else has keys to the hotel," she whispered. "No one!" Jake's mind raced through their options as the footsteps grew louder on the floors below. 3 sets, maybe 4, moving with the coordinated precision of people who'd done this before. Professional, military. "The laptop," he whispered urgently to Amelie. "We need to see what your grandfather was working on. Are you insane?" Her voice was barely audible. "We need to hide or run or find out why someone marked you as compromised and what they're willing to kill for." Jake was already moving toward Henry's desk, his flashlight beam focused on the computer screen. "Your grandfather spent 79 years keeping secrets. He died 2 weeks ago, and now armed professionals are in your hotel. That's not a coincidence." The laptop was password protected, but Jake noticed a piece of paper tucked under the keyboard with what looked like login credentials in Henri's careful handwriting. As he typed, Amelie positioned herself by the secret door, listening to the approaching footsteps. "3rd floor," she whispered. "They're checking every room." Jake's fingers flew over the keyboard as Henry's computer unlocked, revealing a desktop that looked nothing like what an elderly hotel proprietor should have. Multiple encrypted communication programs, sophisticated photo editing software, and folders labeled with dates going back decades. But it was the most recent folder that caught his attention. Blackwood Breach, October 2024. He clicked it open, and his blood turned to ice. The folder contained surveillance photos of a dozen people, including several he recognized from international news coverage: a German chancellor candidate, a French defense minister, 2 American congressmen, and at the bottom of the list, with a red, terminated stamp across his photo, Henri Beaumont himself. "Amélie," Jake whispered urgently. "Your grandfather wasn't just gathering intelligence, he was part of some kind of network, and someone's been systematically eliminating the members." She turned from the door, her face pale in the laptop's glow. "What do you mean, eliminated?" Jake scrolled through the files, his journalist's training helping him parse the coded language. "Look at these dates: Frankfurt, September 15th, heart attack; Brussels, September 28th, car accident; London, October 3rd, suicide. And here," he pointed to the final entry, "Bayeux, October 10th, natural causes." "Grandpère's death date," Amélie breathed. "They're cleaning house," Jake realized. "Something called Operation Blackwood has been compromised, and they're eliminating everyone who knows about it." The footsteps had reached the 4th floor. Jake could hear them testing the ladder to the attic, the old wood creaking under their weight. Amélie grabbed his arm. "There's another way down," she whispered. "A service stairs from the old days for the staff, but we have to go now." Jake quickly plugged a USB drive into the laptop, copying everything he could from Henry's files. The progress bar seemed to move with agonizing slowness as boots appeared at the top of the ladder leading to their hiding place. 15 seconds, Jake muttered, watching the file transfer. "We don't have 15 seconds. Amélie was already moving toward what Jake now realized was a second hidden door, concealed behind a stack of old furniture. The USB finished copying just as Jake heard voices at the entrance to the attic proper. He grabbed the drive, slammed the laptop shut, and followed Amelie through the concealed passage. They found themselves in a narrow stairwell that smelled of dust and decades of disuse. Amelie moved with surprising confidence in the darkness, clearly familiar with this hidden route. Behind them, Jake could hear muffled voices and the sound of the secret room being thoroughly searched. "Where does this lead?" he whispered. "Kitchen cellar. There's a tunnel that connects to the old wine caves under the street. The resistance used them during the war." She paused, looking back at him in the dim light filtering from below. "Grandpère showed me when I was 12. He made me promise never to tell anyone." They reached the bottom of the stairs, emerging behind a wine rack in the hotel's basement. Amelie manipulated something Jake couldn't see, and a section of the stone wall swung inward, revealing a tunnel that disappeared into darkness. "The Americans and British built these during the occupation," she explained as they crawled through the narrow passage. "Part of the intelligence network. They connect most of the old buildings in the historic district." Jake's mind was still processing what they'd discovered in Henri's secret room. "Amelie, your grandfather wasn't just collecting information about wartime activities. Those recent files, he was actively investigating current political figures, and someone killed him for it." They emerged from the tunnel into what appeared to be a natural cave system beneath Bayeux. Amelie produced a small LED flashlight from her jacket, illuminating limestone walls carved with symbols that Jake didn't recognize. "Where are we exactly?" "About 3 blocks from the hotel, underneath the old monastery. There are dozens of these caves, all connected. The Germans never found them all." She led him through a series of passages that seemed to branch in every direction. "Grandpère used to say the real war was fought down here, not on the beaches." As they walked, Jake's journalist mind was cataloguing everything he'd seen. The sophistication of Henri's operation, the international scope of his intelligence gathering, the recent nature of the surveillance photos. This wasn't the story of an elderly man preserving wartime memories. This was an active intelligence network that had been operating for decades. "Amelie, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." Jake stopped walking, forcing her to turn and face him in the tunnel. "Has anyone else been asking questions about your grandfather recently? Any unusual visitors, phone calls, people showing interest in the hotel's history?" She was quiet for a long moment, and Jake could see her replaying recent events in her mind. "There was a man," she said slowly, "about 3 weeks ago. He said he was writing a book about D-Day veterans and wanted to interview Grandpère. Did your grandfather see him?" "No. Grandpère became very agitated when I mentioned it. He said that no one writes books about heroes who are still keeping secrets." She looked at Jake with growing understanding. "You think that man was connected to whoever killed Grandpère?" "I think your grandfather knew someone was coming for him," Jake said. "And I think he spent his last weeks preparing for exactly this scenario, including leaving those documents where you'd find them and making sure you knew about these tunnels." They continued through the cave system, and Jake noticed that some of the passages showed signs of recent use. Footprints in the dust, modern LED lighting fixtures mounted to the walls. Whatever network Henri had been part of, it was still active. "There's something else," Amelie said, as they reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. "The morning Grandpère died, he gave me a package to put in the hotel's safe. He said if anything happened to him, I should only open it with someone I trusted completely." Jake felt his pulse quicken. "You still have it?" "I moved it to a safety deposit box at the bank the day after the funeral. Grandpère always said banks were more secure than hotel safes." She studied Jake's face in the LED light. "The question is, do I trust you completely?" It was a fair question. Jake had appeared in her life less than 4 hours ago, and already they were hiding in medieval tunnels from people who had apparently murdered her grandfather. But something in her expression told him that Henri Beaumont had prepared his granddaughter for this moment, that the old spy master had anticipated that a journalist would eventually come asking the right questions. "I can't answer that for you," Jake said honestly. But I can tell you that I've built my career on protecting sources and telling stories that powerful people don't want told. If your grandfather left something that explains what we found up there, it's going to come out eventually. The only question is whether it comes out through legitimate journalism or through whoever those people are back at your hotel. Amélie nodded slowly. The bank opens at 9 tomorrow morning, but we need somewhere safe to spend the night. Ideas, she smiled grimly. Grand-père wasn't the only one in Bayeux with secrets. There's someone I need you to meet. They followed the rightmost tunnel for another 10 minutes before reaching a ladder that led up to what appeared to be a maintenance shed. Amélie checked her watch, 11:47 p.m., before carefully opening the door and scanning the area outside. They were in a residential neighborhood Jake didn't recognize, several blocks from the historic district. Amélie led him through narrow streets to a modest house with a small garden. Instead of going to the front door, she walked around to the back and tapped on a window in a specific pattern. The window opened, revealing an elderly man with sharp eyes and military posture despite his age. He took one look at Amélie's face and immediately stepped back to let them climb through. Claude Moreau, Amélie said, by way of introduction. He served with Grand-père in the Resistance. Claude was perhaps 85, but he moved with the alertness of someone much younger. He gestured for them to sit at his kitchen table while he brewed coffee, with movements that suggested this wasn't his first middle-of-the-night crisis meeting. Henri is dead, and now they come for the girl, Claude said in accented English, apparently having sized up Jake immediately. The American journalist, yes? Henri said someone would come asking questions eventually. He knew this would happen, Jake asked. Claude set 3 cups of coffee on the table and fixed Jake with a stare that had probably intimidated German interrogators 70 years earlier. Henri Beaumont spent 79 years keeping the most dangerous secret in Europe. Of course, he knew it would eventually kill him. What secret? Amélie demanded. What was so important that it got Grand-père murdered? Claude looked at her with something like pity. Child, your grandfather was the keeper of Operation Bernhard documentation, the Nazi plan to destabilize Allied currencies. But that was never the real secret. He stood and walked to an old photograph on his mantelpiece, showing a group of young men in resistance gear. Henri was among them, looking impossibly young. The real secret, Claude continued, is that Operation Bernhard never ended. It was transformed, evolved, carried forward by people on both sides of the war who realized that economic warfare was more effective than bullets. Jake felt the story crystallizing around him. You're saying the counterfeiting operation continued after 1945? Not counterfeiting, Claude corrected. Something much more sophisticated. Market manipulation, currency speculation, political bribery, all funded by Nazi gold that was never recovered and managed by a network that included former SS officers, American intelligence operatives, and French businessmen. Blackwood, Jake breathed. Claude nodded grimly. You found Henri's files. Good. Then you know that for 79 years, your grandfather was the only person with complete documentation of everyone involved. Every transaction, every political manipulation, every death they ordered to keep their secrets safe. Amélie's cup rattled against its saucer as her hands began to shake. Are you telling me that Grand-père was part of some kind of Nazi conspiracy? No, child. Henri was never part of Blackwood. Claude returned to the table, his expression serious. He was their most dangerous enemy. For 79 years, he gathered evidence, documented their crimes, and waited for the right moment to expose them. What changed? Jake asked. Why now? Claude smiled grimly. Because 3 weeks ago, Henri discovered that Blackwood was planning something they called the final solution to the European question. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They're going to crash the euro. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Jake's mind raced through the implications. A coordinated attack on European currency could destabilize governments, collapse economies, potentially start another world war. When? Jake asked. November 4th, Claude replied. American Election Day. While the world's attention is focused on democracy in America, Blackwood will execute coordinated attacks on European markets that will make the 2008 financial crisis look like a minor correction. And the people we're hiding from. Amelie's voice was steady now, as if understanding the scope of the threat had given her courage. Blackwood cleanup crew. They've been eliminating anyone who could expose the operation. Claude stood and walked to his kitchen window, peering through the curtains at the dark street outside. Henri was the most dangerous because he had everything: names, bank accounts, government connections going back 8 decades. Jake pulled out his cell phone. I need to contact my editor, get this story out before... No. Claude's voice was sharp. They monitor electronic communications. The moment you make a call or send an email, they'll triangulate your location. Then what do you suggest? Claude turned back to them, and Jake saw something in the old man's eyes that reminded him why the French resistance had been so effective against the German occupation. We do what Henri would have wanted. We get the evidence from the bank, we document everything, and then we make sure the story reaches people who can stop Blackwood before November 4th. And if they find us first? Claude's smile was cold and entirely without humor. Then we remind them why old resistance fighters are still alive when so many of their enemies are not. Outside, the sound of car engines echoed through the narrow streets of Bayeux. Multiple vehicles, moving in coordinated patterns, searching. The hunters had found their trail. The car engines were getting closer. Claude moved through his house with the efficient calm of someone who had spent decades preparing for this moment, gathering items from various hiding places. A vintage Luger pistol, several passports, cash in multiple currencies, and what appeared to be a military-grade radio transmitter. We leave in 2 minutes, he announced. Take only what you can carry and run with. Jake clutched his USB drive containing Henri's files. Where can we go that they won't find us? The same place Henri hid for 3 days in 1944 when the Gestapo came for him, Claude replied. But first, we need to contact someone who can help us get Henri's evidence to the right people. He activated the radio transmitter, and Jake was surprised to hear it crackle to life with what sounded like encrypted military communications. Numbers, coordinates, coded phrases, all in multiple languages. This is Tempest, Claude spoke into the microphone, requesting immediate extraction for 3 packages, authorization Bernhard 7. A voice responded in accented English, Tempest, this is Control, extraction approved. Proceed to secondary safe house. Be advised, Blackwood assets are active in your sector. Claude switched off the radio and looked at Jake with grim satisfaction. NATO intelligence has been monitoring Blackwood for 6 months, but they needed proof. Henri's documentation could be exactly what they need to prevent November 4th. NATO? Amélie stared at the radio. Grand-père was working with NATO? Your grandfather never stopped fighting fascists, child. The uniforms changed, but the enemy remained the same. Claude shouldered a small backpack and moved toward his back door. Now we move. Stay close, stay quiet, and trust that Henri taught me well. They slipped out into the night just as headlights swept across Claude's front yard. 3 black SUVs had surrounded the house, and Jake could see armed figures moving with military precision through the shadows. Claude led them through a maze of residential gardens and narrow alleyways, avoiding streetlights and main roads. Despite his age, he moved with surprising speed and agility, clearly following a route he had memorized decades earlier. Where exactly are we going? Jake whispered, as they paused behind a small church. The Bayeux War Cemetery, Claude replied. Henri's real safe house was never the hotel or the tunnels. It was among the dead. They reached the cemetery after 20 minutes of careful movement through the darkness. Jake had visited the Commonwealth War Graves Commission Cemetery during his research, nearly 4,200 graves of British, Canadian, and other Allied soldiers who died during the Battle of Normandy. But he had no idea it concealed one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in European history. Claude produced a small flashlight and led them to a section of the cemetery that looked identical to every other row of white headstones. But as they reached the grave of Private James Mitchell, aged 22, Royal Engineers, Claude knelt and began manipulating something at the base of the headstone. Henri chose this location carefully, he explained, as a section of the seemingly solid stone foundation swung open on concealed hinges. Who questions an old man visiting war graves? He came here twice a week for 79 years, and no one ever wondered why. The hidden compartment revealed a ladder leading down into what appeared to be a concrete bunker. As they descended, LED lights activated automatically, illuminating a space that took Jake's breath away. Henri Beaumont's true headquarters was a masterpiece of covert engineering. The underground facility extended beneath at least a dozen grave sites, with rooms dedicated to different aspects of his decades-long intelligence operation. Computer servers hummed quietly in climate-controlled chambers. Filing cabinets lined walls like a vast library of secrets, and in the center of it all, a conference table surrounded by chairs, as if Henri had been hosting regular meetings with invisible collaborators. "My God," Jake breathed. "How long has this been here?" "Henri began construction in 1947, Claude replied, activating various systems with practiced familiarity. Initially, it was just a small bunker for storing sensitive documents. But as Blackwood grew in power and influence, Henri expanded the facility to match their sophistication. Amélie wandered through the space like someone discovering a hidden wing of her childhood home. "Grandpère came here twice a week my entire life. I thought he was just mourning the war." "He was mourning," Claude corrected gently, "but he was also working. Every political assassination that looked like an accident, every financial crisis that seemed to come from nowhere, every election that produced surprising results. Henri documented it all." Jake found himself in a room that looked like a museum exhibit, titled "The Secret History of Post-War Europe." Photographs, documents, and timeline charts covered every wall. But it was the centerpiece that made him understand the true scope of Henri's mission. A massive map of Europe with red lines connecting major cities, dates spanning from 1945 to 2024, and the words Blackwood Network written in block letters at the top. "This is incredible," Jake said, pulling out his camera to document what he was seeing. Henri mapped the entire conspiracy. "Not just mapped," Claude corrected. "He infiltrated it. For 79 years, Henri Beaumont was Blackwood's most trusted financial advisor." Jake's camera froze halfway to his face. "What?" Claude's expression was grim as he activated a large monitor that descended from the ceiling. "How do you think Henri knew so much about their operations? He wasn't just observing from the outside, he was a key member of their inner circle." The monitor displayed what appeared to be a video conference call from just 3 weeks earlier. Jake recognized Henri immediately, but the elderly man on the screen bore little resemblance to the kindly hotel proprietor Amélie had described. This Henri Beaumont spoke with authority and confidence about market manipulation strategies, political assassination timelines, and something called final phase implementation. "I don't understand," Amélie whispered, staring at her grandfather's image. "He was working with them." "Watch," Claude said, advancing the video to a crucial moment. On screen, Henri's demeanor suddenly changed. Where before he had been collaborative and strategic, now he became confrontational. "Gentlemen," the recorded Henri said, "I'm afraid I have some concerns about the November timeline." The other faces in the video conference, Jake counted 6 people, though their faces were obscured by shadow, responded with obvious irritation. One voice, speaking English with what sounded like a German accent, said, "Henri, you've been with us for 8 decades. Surely you understand that the final solution cannot be delayed." "The final solution," Henri repeated, his voice heavy with disgust. "Do you hear yourselves? You sound exactly like your predecessors in 1944. The tension in the recorded meeting was palpable. Jake could see Henri making a decision in real time, the moment when decades of careful infiltration turned into open defiance. "I have documentation of everything," Henri continued on the recording. "Every transaction, every assassination, every manipulation of democratic processes. And if you proceed with November 4th, I will release it all." The video ended abruptly, but Claude activated another screen, showing a different angle of the same meeting. This camera had captured something the first one missed: Henry's hands, working frantically beneath his desk, clearly uploading files to some kind of external storage device. He copied everything, Jake realized. That's what got him killed. Henri had been preparing for this moment since 1947, Claude explained. He knew that eventually Blackwood would plan something so catastrophic that he would have to choose between maintaining his cover and stopping them. Amélie was staring at the screens with a mixture of horror and admiration. So Grandpère was a double agent for 79 years? Triple agent, actually, Claude corrected. He worked with NATO intelligence, the French DGSE, and American CIA while maintaining his position within Blackwood. It was the most sophisticated long-term infiltration operation in intelligence history. Jake's mind was racing through the implications. The package at the bank, that's what Henri copied during this meeting. Complete financial records, assassination orders, political corruption files, and most importantly, the detailed plans for November 4th. Claude activated another monitor, this one showing a countdown clock. 23 days, 14 hours, 33 minutes. "We need to get that package," Jake said. "And we need to get it to people who can act on this information." "Agreed. But first, you need to understand what you're really dealing with." Claude activated one final screen, and Jake felt his blood turn to ice. The display showed an organizational chart of Blackwood's current membership. At the top, labeled Supreme Council, were 6 names. Jake recognized 3 of them immediately: the current German Chancellor, a former American Secretary of Defense, and the head of one of Europe's largest banks. But it was the 6th name that made Jake's hands shake as he read it. Director of Operations, Marcus Sterling, NATO Intelligence Division. "Jesus Christ," Jake breathed. "Blackwood has someone inside NATO." Claude nodded grimly. "Which means whoever I contacted on the radio could be walking us into a trap," Amélie finished. As if summoned by her words, they heard sounds from above, footsteps moving systematically through the cemetery, the low voices of people conducting a professional search. The LED lights in Henry's bunker suddenly switched to emergency red lighting, and a computerized voice began announcing perimeter breach, initiating lockdown protocol. Steel barriers began descending over the entrances they had used to access the underground facility. Claude moved quickly to a communications console and began typing rapidly. "Henri programmed this place for exactly this scenario," he explained. "We're now completely sealed in, but we also have secure communication links that even Blackwood can't intercept." Jake watched the countdown clock continue its relentless progress toward November 4th. "How long can we stay hidden down here?" "Long enough," Claude replied, activating what appeared to be a high-resolution camera system that showed multiple views of the cemetery above. "But more importantly, Henri's final protocol gives us access to something Blackwood has been trying to find for decades." He led them to a vault door that Jake hadn't noticed before, concealed behind what appeared to be a memorial wall. Claude input a lengthy code, and the door swung open to reveal a space that looked like the world's most dangerous safety deposit box. "The original Bernhard archive," Claude announced. "Every document, photograph, and piece of evidence Henri collected since 1944, including the location of $17 billion in Nazi gold that Blackwood has been using to fund their operations." Jake stepped into the vault and felt like he was entering the secret heart of modern European history. Files upon files, each labeled with dates, locations, and names that read like a who's who of political and financial power over the past 8 decades. But it was the final file that caught his attention. November 4th, 2024. The final solution to the European question. He opened it and began reading, and what he found there made him understand why Henri Beaumont had been willing to die to prevent it from happening. "Amélie," he said quietly, "your grandfather wasn't just trying to stop a financial crisis." She looked up from a box of photographs she had been examining. "What do you mean?" Jake held up the file, his hands trembling slightly. "According to this, the November 4th attack isn't designed to crash the euro. It's designed to collapse the European Union entirely, economically, politically, and socially. Blackwood wants to return Europe to the nationalism and authoritarianism of the 1930s. "And they have the resources to do it?" Claude asked. Jake nodded, scanning through pages of detailed financial analysis. 17 billion in untraceable Nazi gold, plus 80 years of accumulated interest and investments. They could destabilize any currency on Earth. The red emergency lighting suddenly switched to an even more urgent strobe pattern, and Henry's computerized voice announced, "Communication intercept detected. Blackwood assets converging on facility." Through the security cameras, they could see at least 20 armed figures surrounding the cemetery. Professional soldiers with military equipment, night vision gear, and enough firepower to level a small building. "They found us," Amélie said. Claude was already moving, activating systems throughout the bunker. Henri prepared for this too. This facility has an emergency escape route that leads directly to the Bayeux Cathedral, but we can only take what we can carry. Jake looked around at the vault full of evidence that could prevent a continental catastrophe. "We can't leave all this behind." "We won't," Claude replied, connecting a large external drive to Henri's main computer system. Henri automated everything. "The moment we trigger the escape protocol, copies of every file in this archive will be transmitted simultaneously to NATO intelligence, Interpol, the FBI, and major news organizations across 3 continents." "Even if Blackwood has people inside those organizations?" Jake asked. Claude smiled with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime outmaneuvering enemies. Henri was paranoid enough to create multiple redundancies. "Even if half the recipients are compromised, enough will get through to stop November 4th. The sound of drilling equipment echoed through the bunker as Blackwood operatives began attempting to breach Henri's fortifications. But Jake could see on the security monitors that they were having trouble. The old spy had built his final refuge to withstand exactly this kind of assault. "How much time do we have?" Amélie asked. Claude checked the status of the file transmission. 72% complete. 5 minutes for the upload. Then we activate the escape protocol and pray that Henri's paranoia was sufficient to save Europe. Jake clutched the USB drive he had taken from Henri's hotel room, realizing that in his pocket he carried enough evidence to topple governments and prevent a second European catastrophe. The story he had come to France to write, about ordinary people surviving extraordinary circumstances, had become something far more significant. He was now part of the most important intelligence operation since World War II, and the deadline for preventing economic warfare against an entire continent was counting down minute by minute. The drilling sounds above grew louder, and Jake realized that whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether Henri Beaumont's 79-year mission to protect Europe from fascism would finally succeed, or whether his death would be the first casualty in a new kind of war. The file transmission hit 85% just as the first explosion rocked the bunker. Dust rained from the ceiling, and several of Henri's monitors flickered but remained operational. Through the security cameras, Jake could see Blackwood operatives setting shaped charges at multiple entry points. "They're not trying to capture us," Claude observed grimly. "They're planning to bury us down here." "How is that possible?" Amélie demanded. This is a war cemetery. There are international treaties protecting places like this. Claude's laugh was bitter. Child, these people have been violating international treaties since 1945. A few Commonwealth graves won't stop them. The transmission progress bar crawled to 91%. Jake found himself holding his breath, willing the ancient computer systems to work faster. How long does the escape route take to activate? 2 minutes once we trigger it, Claude replied, his fingers dancing over multiple control panels. But Henri programmed a 30-second delay between file completion and route activation. He wanted to ensure nothing could stop the evidence from getting out. Another explosion shook the facility, and this time Jake heard the distinctive sound of metal being torn apart. The Blackwood operatives had breached the first security barrier, 95%. "There's something you need to understand," Claude said, turning from his monitoring station to face Jake and Amélie. Henri's escape route was designed for one person, maximum 2 in an emergency. Jake felt his stomach drop. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm 85 years old, and I've been fighting fascists since I was 16. This is where my war ends." Claude pulled out the vintage Luger he had taken from his house. "You two are going to get that package from the bank and make sure Henri's evidence reaches the right people." "No," Amélie said firmly. "We're not leaving you behind. You are, because that's what Henri would have ordered. And I've been following his orders for 7 decades. Claude's voice carried absolute authority. "Besides, someone needs to ensure the facility is completely destroyed after you escape. We can't leave anything for Blackwood to salvage." 97%. The security cameras showed Blackwood operatives now inside the outer perimeter of the bunker. Jake could count at least a dozen armed figures moving through Henri's carefully constructed maze of offices and archives. They moved with professional efficiency, clearly following a detailed floor plan of the facility. "How do they know this place so well?" Jake asked. Claude's expression darkened. "Because Marcus Sterling, your NATO friend, has been feeding them intelligence for months. He probably helped them plan this entire operation." 98%. Jake's mind raced through their options. Even if they escaped through Henri's route, they still needed to reach the bank, retrieve Henri's package, and somehow get the evidence to people who could act on it, all while being hunted by an organization with apparently unlimited resources and government connections. "Claude," he said, "assuming we make it out of here, who can we trust? If Blackwood has penetrated NATO, the CIA, probably other agencies." Henri maintained contact with a small group of people who have been fighting this battle as long as he has, Claude replied, adjusting settings on what appeared to be a self-destruct mechanism. "There's a woman in Brussels, Dr. Elena Vasquez, European Central Bank. She's been investigating suspicious market activities for years without knowing about Blackwood. And in Washington, a journalist named David Chen at the Washington Post. He's been tracking financial irregularities that connect to some of the same accounts Henri documented. 99%. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the bunker's corridors. Professional, coordinated, getting closer. Jake could see on the monitors that the Blackwood operatives had reached the main archive rooms and were systematically destroying evidence as they advanced. "They're not just here to stop us," Jake realized. "They're erasing Henri's entire operation." 100%. Transmission complete. The moment the progress bar hit full, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. But these weren't emergency alarms, they were celebration alarms. Henri had programmed his computers to play a recording of church bells when the mission was complete. 79 years, Claude said quietly, tears in his eyes. "Henri, mon ami, you finally did it." The escape protocol activated automatically. A section of the vault wall swung open, revealing a narrow tunnel that sloped upward into darkness. Jake could smell fresh air and hear the distant sound of traffic. "Go," Claude ordered, taking position behind a makeshift barricade he had constructed from filing cabinets. "The tunnel emerges in the cathedral's bell tower. From there, you can reach the bank without being seen." Amélie kissed the old man's forehead. Thank you for everything, Claude. Grand-père was lucky to have a friend like you. No, Claude replied, checking his weapon. I was lucky to serve with a man like Henri. Now go and finish what we started. Jake and Amélie entered the escape tunnel just as the first Blackwood operatives breached the vault area. Behind them, they heard Claude's voice, strong and defiant. Gentlemen, I am Claude Moreau of the French Resistance. You are trespassing on sacred ground, and I am placing you under citizen's arrest. The gunfire started immediately. Jake and Amélie crawled through the tunnel as quickly as they could, the sound of the firefight growing fainter behind them. The passage was expertly constructed, with proper ventilation and even small LED lights to guide their way. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, they emerged through a concealed panel into the base of Bayeux Cathedral's bell tower. The contrast was jarring, from Henry's high-tech bunker to the medieval stonework of one of Normandy's most famous churches. Jake checked his watch. 3:47 a.m. The bank wouldn't open for more than 5 hours. We need somewhere to hide until morning, he said. Somewhere Blackwood won't think to look. Amélie was staring out of a small window at the cemetery in the distance. Smoke was rising from several locations, and Jake could see the red and blue lights of emergency vehicles arriving at the scene. Claude, she whispered. He knew what he was doing, Jake said gently. He chose to make sure we could complete the mission. They climbed the spiral staircase to the cathedral's upper levels, finding a small chamber that appeared to be used for storage. It was cold and uncomfortable, but it offered a clear view of both the cemetery and the street leading to the bank. As dawn broke over Bayeux, Jake and Amélie watched the aftermath of the night's battle. Fire trucks were still working to contain the blaze at the cemetery, and Jake counted at least 6 ambulances that had come and gone. On his phone, he found early news reports describing it as a gas explosion at maintenance facilities near the Commonwealth War Cemetery. They're covering it up already, he said. Amélie was examining the USB drive Jake had taken from Henry's hotel computer. We have copies of Grand-père's files, but without the package from the bank, do we have enough evidence to stop November 4th? Jake considered this. The USB contained extensive documentation of Blackwood's activities, but he suspected Henry's final package contained something more. Perhaps the actual financial instruments needed to execute the November attack, or the specific government contacts who would need to be warned. There's only one way to find out, he said, but first we need to assume that Blackwood knows about the safety deposit box. They've had 2 weeks since Henry's death to investigate his activities. At 8:30 a.m., they watched the Crédit Agricole Bank across the square begin its morning preparations. Jake used a small pair of binoculars he'd found in the cathedral storage room to observe the building and surrounding area. 3 men in suits sitting in a car across from the bank entrance, he reported. 2 more at the cafe on the corner, professional surveillance but trying to look casual. So how do we get inside without being caught? Jake studied the bank's architecture and the flow of morning customers. We don't. We get someone else to go in for us. He had noticed an elderly priest making his morning rounds, greeting parishioners and local business owners. Father Michel Dubois, according to the nameplate outside the cathedral office, had been serving this parish for 37 years. Amélie, Jake said carefully, how much do you trust in your grandfather's reputation in this community? Everyone respected Grand-père. He was like an institution. Then we're going to gamble that respect extends to helping his granddaughter in a crisis. They found Father Dubois in the cathedral's sacristy, preparing for morning mass. He was perhaps 70, with kind eyes and hands that spoke of decades of manual labor alongside his clerical duties. Father, Amélie began in French, I am Amélie Beaumont. Henri was my grandfather. The priest's face immediately softened with recognition and sympathy. Ah, child, I am so sorry for your loss. Your grandfather was a pillar of our community. We will all miss him terribly. Father, I need your help with something that Grand-père left for me, but there are dangerous people who don't want me to have it. Jake watched the priest's expression change as Amélie explained their situation, carefully edited to focus on Henri's documentation of wartime activities and the danger they now faced. She showed him the key Henri had left and explained about the safety deposit box. "These men who are watching the bank," Father Dubois said thoughtfully, "they are the same ones who caused the explosion at the cemetery last night?" "We believe so, yes." The priest was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the risks. Finally he nodded. "Your grandfather attended Mass here every Sunday for 79 years, never missed except when he was traveling. If Henri Beaumont left something for his granddaughter, then his granddaughter should have it. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Father Dubois would enter the bank as part of his normal weekly routine. He maintained the parish accounts there and was well known to all the staff. Amélie would provide him with her identification and the proper authorization papers to access Henri's safety deposit box. The priest would retrieve the contents and return them to the cathedral. "And if these dangerous men become suspicious of me?" Father Dubois asked. "Then you're just an elderly priest doing banking for his church," Jake replied, "the most innocent person in Bayeux." At 9:15 a.m. they watched Father Dubois walk calmly across the square toward the bank. The surveillance team didn't give him a second glance. Jake held his breath as the priest disappeared into the building. "What if there's nothing in the box?" Amélie asked. "What if Grandpère's final secret died with Claude?" "Then we use what we have and hope it's enough," Jake replied. But privately, he was thinking about the November 4th deadline, now just 22 days away, and wondering if 2 civilians with a USB drive could really stop a conspiracy that had been 8 decades in the making. Through the binoculars, he watched one of the surveillance team members speak into a radio. Then the man got out of his car and began walking toward the bank entrance. "Shit," Jake muttered. "They made him." Father Dubois had been inside for almost 20 minutes, longer than a normal banking transaction should take. The Blackwood operative was now at the bank's front door, clearly preparing to enter. "We need to create a distraction," Jake said, looking around the cathedral for anything that might help. That's when Amélie smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. "I know exactly what Grandpère would do." She walked to the cathedral's bell tower controls, and with the confidence of someone who had grown up in this building, began ringing the bells in a specific pattern. Not the normal call to worship, but something more urgent. Within minutes, people began emerging from buildings throughout the historic district. The bells were ringing the traditional pattern for fire alarm, a system that had been used in Bayeux for centuries. As townspeople gathered in the square, looking around for signs of emergency, the Blackwood surveillance team found themselves surrounded by concerned citizens. The operative who had been approaching the bank was now trapped in a crowd of people asking questions and looking for smoke. Father Dubois emerged from the bank, carrying a small package, walking calmly through the crowd toward the cathedral. He nodded to several parishioners, blessed a child, and generally behaved exactly like a priest who had been interrupted in his banking by a fire alarm. "Brilliant," Jake breathed. 10 minutes later, they were back in the cathedral storage room with Henri's final bequest. The package was smaller than Jake had expected, a manila envelope containing what appeared to be documents, a second USB drive, and something wrapped in cloth. Amélie opened the envelope first. Inside were 3 items that made Jake's pulse race: a handwritten letter addressed to her, a list of bank account numbers and routing codes, and what appeared to be authentication keys for financial transactions totaling billions of dollars. "Grandpère's letter," she said, reading aloud. "My dearest Amélie, if you are reading this, then my 79-year mission has finally reached its conclusion. I pray that you and your companion, I assume there will be a companion, as stories like mine are never finished by one person alone, have found the evidence needed to stop Blackwood's final attack on European democracy. The account information in this package represents the complete financial infrastructure of Operation Blackwood. Every bank, every transaction, every political payment made since 1945. But more importantly, the authentication keys will allow you to freeze all of these accounts simultaneously. However, this can only be done from a specific location, the European Central Bank in Brussels. Dr. Elena Vasquez, whom Claude will have mentioned, has been waiting for this information for 3 years. She has the authority and the technical capability to execute a complete financial shutdown of Blackwood's operations. But you must reach her before November 1st. After that date, Blackwood will implement new security protocols that will make their accounts untouchable. I am sorry, ma petite, that your inheritance has turned out to be a war. But you are stronger than you know, and you carry the blood of people who have been fighting fascists for generations. Complete our mission, and then live the peaceful life I could never give you. All my love, Grand-Père. Jake unwrapped the cloth bundle and found Henri's final surprise. A passport in Amelie's name, but with a different surname and photograph that looked like her, but wasn't quite her. Professional-grade documentation that would fool any border control. Your grandfather thought of everything, Jake said admiringly. Not everything, Amelie replied, checking the date on her phone. We have 72 hours to get from Normandy to Brussels. Make contact with Dr. Vasquez and execute a financial operation that will disable a network that's been operating since World War II. Jake looked out the cathedral window at the Blackwood surveillance team, still searching the area around the bank. And we have to do it while being hunted by professional killers who have unlimited resources and government connections. Yes, Amélie said, standing and shouldering the small backpack Father Dubois had provided. But Grand-Père spent 79 years preparing for this moment, and Claude died to make sure we could complete it. She looked at Jake with an expression that reminded him strongly of the determined young resistance fighters he'd seen in historical photographs. We're going to Brussels, Monsieur Morrison, and we're going to save Europe. As they prepared to leave the cathedral, Jake realized that the story he had come to France to write, about ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, had become the story he was now living. In 72 hours, they would either prevent the greatest economic attack in modern history, or they would become footnotes in the story of Europe's second fall to fascism. The countdown to November 4th continued its relentless progression, and Jake Morrison, investigative journalist from Chicago, was about to become the most important war correspondent since Edward R. Murrow. Jake pressed himself against the cold concrete wall of the European Central Bank's parking garage, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. 60 hours of running, hiding and evading Blackwood operatives had brought them to this moment, 13 minutes before Henri Beaumont's 79-year mission would either succeed or fail catastrophically. The journey from Bayeux had been a masterclass in Henri's paranoid preparation. The fake passport he'd left for Amélie got them through border controls without incident. A network of safe houses established decades earlier provided shelter during their sprint across France, Belgium, and finally into Brussels. But most importantly, Henri's contacts, people who had been waiting years for this exact scenario, had smoothed their path at every crucial juncture. Dr. Vasquez is in position, Amélie whispered, checking the encrypted phone that Henri's Brussels contact had provided. Security feeds show Blackwood operatives at 3 entrances, but the service tunnel is still clear. Jake studied the tablet displaying the European Central Bank's floor plans. Henri had somehow obtained architectural blueprints that showed not just the official building layout, but a detailed map of maintenance tunnels, security systems, and even the location of emergency communication equipment. Your grandfather really was something else, Jake said, shaking his head in amazement. He planned this operation down to the minute. Grand-Père understood that Blackwood would never stop, Amélie replied, checking Henri's authentication keys one final time. This had to work perfectly, or it wouldn't work at all. They had learned more about Henri's network during their desperate journey to Brussels. Dr. Elena Vasquez wasn't just a random contact. She was the daughter of a Spanish Republican fighter who had worked with Henri during World War II. For 3 years, she had been quietly investigating suspicious financial transactions that kept leading back to accounts Henri was now giving them the power to freeze. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, which Jake recognized as Henri's signature style. Dr. Vasquez would create a legitimate emergency financial audit that required immediate access to suspicious international accounts. Using Henri's authentication keys, she would simultaneously freeze over 200 bank accounts across 17 countries, effectively cutting off Blackwood's ability to execute their November 4th attack. But first, Jake and Amelie had to reach her office on the 12th floor without being captured by the Blackwood operatives who had been hunting them across 2 countries. "Movement," Amelie reported, watching security feeds on her phone. 3 men entering through the main lobby. "They're dressed like maintenance workers, but they move like soldiers," Jake finished, recognizing the same professional coordination they had observed in Bayeux. "How long do we have?" Amelie checked her watch. 11:51 p.m. "Dr. Vasquez needs exactly 7 minutes to execute the account freezes. The process has to be completed before midnight, or Blackwood's new security protocols activate automatically." They entered the service tunnel that Henri's blueprints had revealed, crawling through a maze of pipes and electrical conduits that led directly to the ECB's central computer core. Jake marveled at the old spy's thoroughness. Even these blueprints were annotated with notes about guard rotations, camera blind spots, and emergency procedures. The tunnel emerged in a utility room 2 floors below Dr. Vasquez's office. As they climbed the service stairwell, Jake could hear voices echoing from the main floors, Blackwood operatives conducting a systematic search of the building. "Dr. Vasquez," Amelie whispered into her encrypted phone, "we're 2 minutes out." "Understood," came the reply in accented English. "I have the financial interface ready. The moment you provide Henri's authentication keys, I can begin the shutdown sequence." They reached the 12th floor at 11:54 p.m. Dr. Vasquez's office was at the end of a long corridor lined with the offices of other ECB officials. Jake could see light under her door and shadows moving inside. She was waiting for them. But as they approached her office, Jake heard something that made his blood freeze, the distinctive ping of an elevator arriving at their floor. "They found us," he whispered. Amelie was already moving, pulling Jake toward Dr. Vasquez's office as the elevator doors opened behind them. Jake risked a glance back and saw 3 men in dark suits moving with military precision toward their position. They burst through Dr. Vasquez's office door to find a woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and graying hair, sitting at a computer terminal that looked like mission control for the European financial system. "You must be Henri's granddaughter," she said, standing and extending her hand. "I have been waiting 3 years for this moment." "Dr. Vasquez, we have maybe 60 seconds, Jake said urgently. "Blackwood operatives are in the building." She was already turning back to her computer. "Then we do this quickly. The authentication keys." Amelie handed over Henri's USB drive, just as they heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Dr. Vasquez inserted the drive, and Jake watched as her screen filled with bank account information, routing numbers and financial data that represented 8 decades of Nazi gold being used to destabilize democratic governments. "Mon Dieu," Dr. Vasquez breathed. "Henri documented everything. Every transaction, every political payment, every market manipulation since 1945. 11:57 p.m. The footsteps in the corridor had stopped directly outside the office. Jake could see shadows under the door, at least 3 people, probably armed, definitely preparing to breach the room. "How long?" Jake asked. 90 seconds to initialize all the account freezes," Dr. Vasquez replied, her fingers flying over her keyboard. "But I need uninterrupted access to execute the commands." The door handle turned slowly. Jake looked around the office for anything that could be used as a weapon or barricade. Dr. Vasquez's office was designed for financial analysis, not combat. But Jake noticed something that might help: an emergency communication system that connected directly to EU security services. 11:58 p.m. "Dr. Vasquez," Jake said urgently, "can you contact EU security from here?" "Yes, but do it now. Tell them there's an armed intrusion at the ECB by people attempting to sabotage European financial systems." She activated the emergency communication system just as the office door opened. 3 men in dark suits entered, and Jake immediately recognized the lead operative, the same man who had been surveilling the bank in Bayeux. "Step away from the computer," the operative said in accented English. His weapon was trained on Dr. Vasquez, but his eyes were fixed on the screen showing Henri's financial data. "You're too late," Dr. Vasquez said calmly, not moving from her keyboard. "The shutdown sequence is already initialized." 11:59 p.m. Jake could see the progress bar on her screen. 78% complete, but the Blackwood operative was moving toward the computer, clearly intending to physically stop the process. "Amélie," Jake whispered. "Henri's letter mentioned a dead man's switch. What if stopping the financial shutdown triggers something else?" She understood immediately. Grandpère always had backup plans. The operative reached Dr. Vasquez's computer just as the progress bar hit 95%. But instead of stopping the shutdown, he found himself staring at a message that appeared on the screen in multiple languages. "Warning! Financial shutdown in progress. Interruption will trigger immediate release of all documentation to international media and law enforcement." Jake realized what Henri had done. The old spy had programmed a final safeguard. Any attempt to stop the account freezes would automatically transmit every piece of evidence he had collected over 79 years to news organizations and government agencies worldwide. 12 a.m., November 1st, 2024. The progress bar hit 100%, just as EU security forces burst through the office door. Dr. Vasquez's emergency alert had brought armed response teams, who now found themselves confronting Blackwood operatives in the act of attempting financial sabotage. "Account freezes complete," Dr. Vasquez announced with satisfaction. 217 accounts across 17 countries, totaling approximately $18 billion, are now frozen pending investigation. The lead Blackwood operative looked at the computer screen with an expression of defeated rage. Without access to their accumulated wealth, Operation Blackwood couldn't execute their November 4th attack on European markets. 8 decades of careful planning had been undone by Henri Beaumont's even more careful preparation. "You have no idea what you've done," the operative said to Jake as EU security officers placed him in restraints. "Actually, I do," Jake replied. "We just prevented the economic collapse of the European Union." 3 weeks later, Chicago Tribune newsroom. Jake Morrison sat at his desk, putting the finishing touches on what would become the most important investigative series of his career. The story that had begun as a simple human interest piece about D-Day veterans had evolved into The Blackwood Files, a comprehensive exposé of the longest-running financial conspiracy in modern history. The evidence Henri had collected over 79 years was now being analyzed by law enforcement agencies in 12 countries. The account freezes Dr. Vasquez had executed had revealed a financial network that connected to political corruption scandals, mysterious deaths, and market manipulations dating back to 1945. "Jake," his editor called from across the newsroom. "The Post just called. They want to know if you're interested in a Pulitzer nomination." Jake looked at the photograph on his desk. Henri Beaumont as a young man, standing with other resistance fighters in 1944. Amélie had given it to him as a reminder that some stories take a lifetime to tell properly. "It wasn't my story," Jake replied. "I was just the person who helped finish it." His phone rang. International number, Brussels area code. "Jake, it's Amélie." Her voice was stronger now, more confident. "I wanted to let you know they're offering me a position with EU financial intelligence. Apparently, Grandpare's documentation revealed so many ongoing investigations that they need someone who understands his filing system. Jake smiled. Are you going to take it? I think Grandpere would want me to. There are still people out there who believe in Blackwood's ideas. Someone needs to keep watching. After ending the call, Jake returned to his article, writing the final paragraphs of a story that had started in a small hotel in Normandy and ended with the exposure of one of history's most successful intelligence operations. But as he typed, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Henry Beaumont's story wasn't really finished. The old spy had spent 79 years fighting the same enemy in different forms, and Jake suspected that victory in one battle didn't mean the war was over. He looked again at the photograph of young Henri, remembering something Claude Moreau had said in those final moments in the bunker. Henri never stopped fighting fascists. The uniforms changed, but the enemy remained the same. Outside his office window, Chicago bustled with the normal activities of American democracy. People going to work, protesters exercising their right to free speech, reporters pursuing stories that held the powerful accountable. It was the kind of ordinary freedom that Henri Beaumont had spent his entire life protecting, often without anyone knowing his name or understanding his sacrifice. Jake opened a new document on his computer and began typing, "The Henri Beaumont Papers, a complete archive, editor's note." This collection represents the complete intelligence files of Henri Beaumont, 1927 to 2024, who spent 79 years documenting and ultimately defeating Operation Blackwood, a financial conspiracy that threatened the stability of democratic governments worldwide. These documents are being released simultaneously to ensure that the full scope of Blackwood's activities becomes part of the historical record. More importantly, they serve as a reminder that democracy's greatest defenders are often ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things when freedom is threatened. The story begins in a small hotel in Normandy, where a young man decided that some secrets are worth spending a lifetime to expose. Jake paused in his typing, thinking about the sealed attic that had started this entire adventure. Henri had spent 79 years keeping that room locked, waiting for the right moment to reveal its contents. In a way, Jake realized, every investigative journalist was doing the same thing, keeping secrets until the moment when revealing them could make the greatest difference. He looked once more at Henri's photograph, then continued writing the story that would ensure Henri Beaumont's 79-year mission would never be forgotten. Outside, the November afternoon was growing dark, but Jake Morrison kept typing, knowing that some stories are too important to wait for tomorrow's deadline. After all, he had learned from the best teacher imaginable, an elderly French hotel proprietor who understood that the most dangerous secrets are often hidden in the most ordinary places, waiting for someone brave enough to ask the right questions.